Hi, and welcome to the Church Growth Strategies course. This is lecture number 5, and we're going to talk about how to determine if a local congregation is in need of growth, renewal, or reformation. Many pastors and lay leaders either assume a church needs to grow or should be growing. By this, they're often referring to numerical or statistical growth. It's true that congregations grow in various ways, but is it true that a church growth is primarily numerical? Furthermore, not all churches want to grow. The leaders of a congregation may not want it to grow. By either surveying the church's resources and priorities or by simply talking to members, you can discover the vision of the church, and you can ascertain as to whether or not the church wants to grow. By either surveying a church's resources and priorities or by talking to the members, you're going to find out why they came to that church, what drew them to that church. And one reason is that they like stability. And that's offered by, in their opinion, the current size of the church and the amount of activity that the church has. You see, people may not be motivated to develop ministries or want the church to grow. This needs to be considered right up front. Growth will mean change, and they may have no compulsion to change. The proverb, "You can take a horse to water, but you can't make him drink," may apply at this point. If a congregation does not sense a need to grow or to be renewed or to reform its practices, it will not be motivated to pay the price that's necessary for change to take place. It should never be assumed that the church wants to grow or should grow. Ministries have what I call a ministry capacity. The church may have run out of physical space. It may be using people in ministry at a pace and intensity that if it increases, it would harm them. Or it simply doesn't have the material resources or the leadership or the personnel to conduct additional ministry. On top of that, not all churches are called to have a vision to reach additional types of people. That is, to add more groups and more groups to their church, or to meet further community needs. A church may be effective in meeting particular needs, but then to add more and more could be overtaxing to a congregation. At some point, a church reaches what's called ministry capacity. When a congregation feels they need to grow, or when it desires to grow, that concern may come from one or more of the following. Number one, every ministry has what I've called a ministry capacity that eventually limits or halts the growth of a local church. Ministry capacity relates to 3 key elements. The first is the amount of people capable of doing ministry, and this includes leadership, support people, and assistants. You could add in there attendees. People have to show up if you're going to have a program. Ministry capacity for any church can develop given the right catalytic elements, such as a visionary leader, people who have experienced an invigoration of their faith. That would include new converts. Simply an increase in the number of people available to do ministry. Number 2, every church experiences growth cycles or life cycles, what Dr. Ken Priddy calls. A life cycle is a church. The life cycles of a church over a specific time frame looks like a bell curve. If you would draw on your paper a little bell curve like this, you'll get the concept of what I'm communicating. On the left side, or the beginning of the life cycle, the church is perceived as being on an incline or growing. That would be coming up. It's growing quantitatively and qualitatively. There is a sense of energy in the congregation. Visitors are not only attending, but they're eventually joining the church. So you're getting new members constantly committing to the church. There's also a future orientation or a vision that drives the leadership of that church. And as a result, conversions are taking place and growth occurs. The second phase of the life cycle is called the recline, sometimes called the plateauing of a church. So you have the inclining or the growing of a church. You have a reclining stage, or what's called a church is on a plateau. At this point in the life cycle, it's neither growing nor decreasing in size, but the church appears to be stable and healthy. The bell curve is at its peak. However, things have changed from the incline phase. The ministry has moved from a future to a present orientation, and it has become more program-oriented than people-oriented or people-driven. The congregation has basically learned to take care of itself. Rather than conversion growth, there's more transfer growth. In other words, Christians in the community are seeing what they like in this church, and so they're just kind of shifting or moving around. And many think at this point the church has reached its goals. But in reality, viability has already been lost. The third phase of the life cycle is when a church is in decline. This is often the point in history of a church where the desire to return to the past develops. So you have the inclining or growing, you have the reclining or plateauing, and then you have the declining or the dying of a congregation. Now, when a church catches itself in a decline stage, it may return to the peak or the recline stage, or it may go back to the incline or growing kind of outreach stage to compensate. In the decline stage, the attitude of the congregation and its leadership are always past-oriented. There's a nostalgic rather than a future hope. Remember the good times that we had. The church is driven by the structures and the logistics of doing ministry, again, rather than really being engaged in individuals' lives. There's a high concern for caring for the members of the church rather than those in need in the community outside the church. And money is used to safeguard what's already in place. And as a result, growth has not been seen for a while. When a church realizes that it has crested in its ministry or reached the decline level of the bell curve of church life, it needs to consider renewal and reform. To renew or grow a church that has been in decline is much more difficult than recognizing the need to grow while the church is still generally healthy. In other words, when the church hits the recline level, at that point is when they should start considering growth issues and growth concerns, not while it's dying or on the decline. Much harder to reverse that pattern the further down the bell curve that you are. Many churches err in thinking they're more healthy than they really are. Church health often has a denial element that causes leadership not to consider important changes that are necessary to keep the church on an incline phase, or they just act too late. Change comes slowly because the problem is not seen early enough. The goal is, before a church reaches a recline phase, to begin new overlapping incline phases. In other words, the church is inclining and growing. Once it begins to recline, it needs to start another inclining phase, and then when that reclines, then start another one. A continually growing church is constantly inclining in its ministry structure. To start an incline phase after a decline will require a tremendous amount of inertia, change, and a lot of painful adjustments. To turn a declining church into an inclining church means a number of things must change to support new, healthy growth. And here's 5 of those things that are going to need to be changed. There may be more, but at least this amount. Number 1, there'll need to be a new and honest perception of the health of the church. And to do this, the church is going to need to look at its statistical records to discover who they currently are and what caused their decline. An objective view of the church's history is important, so that the health of the church is not underestimated or overestimated. Through this historical evaluation, the church will need to discover when and why it stopped reaching out to the community, and why and when it chose to turn into itself for preservational purposes. Number 2, there'll need to be a realignment of the vision to match the vision used during the incline phase of the church. In other words, the vision of the church has been changing throughout its growth pattern. The key question to ask is, what is God doing with us and the community we are called to serve? That's an important question. Realigning a vision is the discovery of who the church is best equipped to reach. The problem may be that the community and the needs of that community have changed. And while the outreaches and focus of the church have not changed or kept up with that change, the community has been changing, and that might be part of the reason, or the major reason, why a church is in decline. Number 3, once a church's history and vision are clarified, the next step is to develop a strategy that will answer the need, how do we reach new contacts? Once these new contacts begin to come to church, how will they develop spiritually? And those 2 questions have to be kept together and answered together in the strategy part. These are key areas of ministry, distinct to each congregation, where each church can successfully reach the lost people in its area. In other words, every church has its own way of reaching its own types of people, and that is going to be unique to every church, and that's a discovery process to find out those things. These people need to be identified, and a strategy must be developed to reach them. Number 4, the most difficult part of moving a church back into the growth pattern is often the stage where church structures must change. Not only does the thinking within the church have to change in order for it to grow, the administration of ministry and the priority of spending have to change And that's a tough pill for many people to swallow. They must reflect the new vision and the alignment with that new vision. When leadership keeps its focus and members support ministry with their personal involvement with the church can change. And the key is you're changing what may be considered good ministry to effective growth ministry. So it's not a matter of something that we're doing is bad. It's good. It's serving the community, the church community. But there's better out there, and you're moving a church into more effective things to do that are growth oriented. And finally, number 5. Finally, with the history of decline properly understood, the vision made clear, the strategy in place, the resources reallocated to support the new strategy, the only thing left to do then is to empower the people to do the ministry. This is essential. Churches grow because people are growing. Shepherds don't birth sheep, we're told. Sheep birth sheep. People need to be inspired. They need to be motivated to do ministry. Inspiration drives a person's to pray for and to participate in the conversion of lost people. Members develop a passion for the things of God when they discover God's will during Bible studies. And this is a clear shift in a church when it's going from decline back into incline. The Bible study topics and themes, they're going to change. Their commitment to support the church is invigorated when they see new life in the church and when they come to church with an anticipation of the gospel being applied in fresh ways. And they, in turn, will have a fresh concern for the lost. You know, it's estimated that 80% of all churches in the continental United States are in need of revitalization. Regardless of the numeric size of a congregation, many churches just haven't grown for years. And there are few ministries that are effective in meeting the needs of the community around them. If you think about the 7 churches in the book of Revelation, they weren't more than 1 generation old, and they were in need of renewal. They had lost their first love, we're told. They compromised core values. They accommodated sin, and they had become sluggish in their good works. Revelation chapter 3, verse 2. They had lost focus and spiritual vitality. They were charged to become overcomers. That's a great word to use when you're growing or birthing or renewing or reforming a church. And they were to listen to what the Spirit was saying to the churches. From the description of the 7 churches in Revelation, we understand the importance of repentance as a means of grace for church growth. So don't underestimate the need to bring a church and its people back to the point of repenting of their own sins. Third issue that we need to deal with. The sense that growth is needed often comes from identifying negative factors that weigh down or stagnate a church. And here are, I think, 3, Here are 3 negative factors. And again, there could be more. These are big ones, though, that weigh down or stagnate church growth. Number 1, the breakdown of relationships within a fellowship can arrest or slow down growth. The church is a community, and if it's full of baggage from unresolved conflicts, it will deflect or deflate energies that would otherwise be used for growth. When the community discovers a church is unable to resolve its own conflicts, that church becomes either irrelevant to the needs of the rest of the community, or it loses its distinctive for being a resource for that community. Church growth ceases because of a church's inability to resolve its own conflicts. And these conflicts come from personality conflicts, power struggles, or just having an inward focus, overly concerned about yourself. Number 2, another negative factor, inertia. Inertia is something difficult to overcome. Apathy, lethargy, disinterest, and indolence are key issues that inhibit church growth. Let's talk about each one just for a minute. Apathy reveals a lack of emotional energy to engage in ministry. When someone is indifferent to growth, they have not reclined, as mentioned earlier, they've actually decreased their desire to grow. That's why I say when you're on the recline level, when you're at the peak of the bell curve, you've already changed the growth pattern of the church. It reflects a person who's going nowhere. Let's talk about lethargy now. Lethargy is like apathy. It's a negative emotional factor in growing. Lethargy is keeping the car in idle. That's what it literally means. It reflects a person who's going nowhere. They don't want to be disturbed. This is oftentimes seen in people, they don't want to make the hard decisions. They don't want to address them. They don't want them to be on the agenda. So you've got apathy, lethargy, disinterest. Disinterest is a negative feeling that grows over time. It doesn't just suddenly pop up or appear. A person was once involved and excited, but excitement has waned. Disinterest leads to an indifference that is very difficult to re-engage. So you need to be careful that you see that indifference kind of grow. It's kind of I'm settled. I'm happy with what I have and I don't want any more. Again, it's an inward focus rather than discovering, well, what is God really trying to do with this church and this community? And the fourth one is indolence. Indolence is just another word for laziness. A person may be aware of the cost of changing, and their desire to be pain-free, which is kind of the root of laziness, basically outweighs this desire for change. And this causes them to be lazy in ministry. Indolence literally means not to feel pain. It hurts to grow. These four symptoms accurately describe the difficulty of inertia in the church. Number three, another negative factor is discouragement. So you've got the breakdown of relationships, you've got the problem of inertia with these four issues facing you, and now you've got discouragement. Discouragement is another negative element within churches that is often grossly underestimated. Courage that was once present and important during the incline phase can be lost due to problems overwhelming the church. Problems discourage vision casting, and when not overcome, can cause the congregation to become pessimistic towards the future. Pessimism is going to kill a church pattern for growth. People are always looking for hope. They're always looking for purpose and meaning. Discouragement, on the other hand, over difficulties demotivates and kind of robs people of hope and purpose and meaning. Problems could be such as failed attempts. You've tried this before and it didn't work. Could be leadership mistakes. Somebody's been domineering or power controlling. It could be just the amount of problems. There's so many we're overwhelmed. They're not necessarily big or huge, but there's too many for us to deal with. And pessimism, if you think about it, in some ways, is a lack of faith that God can do the impossible. Yet, problems are often divine means of change. A crisis can either improve or degrade one's motivation. It makes people feel uncomfortable, that's true, but it also drives them to change. But that change can be for either good or for bad. Discouragement, bottom line, untreated, kills church vitality. It will take prayer and faith. The problems have to be faced and solved if a church is going to experience growth. Let's stop at this point and we'll continue talking about more of the factors that stop church growth.